have mentioned this buzzword DNS many times before. In this video, we will study what it is all about. So DNS stands for Domain Name Service. But first tell me, how many identifiers do you have as a person? So let me get you started. There is your full name as appears in your birth certificate. I'm sure your parents lovingly call you by some pet name, Pappu, Bubbly or Chintu. And then there are your friends who also give you nicknames. Apart from this, what other identifiers do you have? Well, as far as the academic office at an institute is concerned, you are just a roll number to them because it makes it easy for them to process the student records. And then there are passport numbers, driver license numbers, so on. If you as a person have so many identifiers, these internet hosts that servers are no less, they also have multiple identifiers. Two such identifiers are host names and IP addresses. You already know what IP addresses are. Host names, as the name indicates, are the names given to hosts. For example, www.facebook.com could be the host name of the Facebook's web server, and this is the IP address. So if you ask me to remember this particular string, it is very easy for me to remember, whereas I will have lot more difficulty remembering IP addresses. So host names are what are called mnemonic, that means easy to remember. They can be variable length and also they carry no information to help route packets towards them. So for example, if I look at this particular string, I have no idea where this host is located. Whether I have an idea or not is not important. More importantly, the routers have no idea where this host is located. On the contrary, the IP addresses are of fixed length, so this helps processing the strings very efficient at the routers. They are numeric and they also carry routing information within them that gives an idea to a router as to where this particular host is located so that they can send packets accordingly. So here is the problem. People prefer host names whereas routers prefer IP addresses. So we need a service that converts host names to IP addresses, and that service is the domain name service. In reality, DNS does more than host name to IP address translations. So it can convert host names as well as domains to what are called values. IP is an example of one such value. So we will see more of these values later. Let me also explain what a domain means as part of this domain name server. So a domain is a label that defines a realm of administrative authority. Facebook.com is a domain that contains hosts belonging to this particular company. Similarly, iitb.ac.in is a domain that will carry hosts belonging to IITB. So how does DNS work? This example shows. So for example, you are a user. If you type in your web browser this particular URL, what your web browser program does is it is going to call the DNS service and ask it what is the IP address corresponding to this particular host name. And this DNS service is going to get back with an answer that says that this is the IP address corresponding to this host name. And once you get this particular IP address, your web browser then is going to establish a TCP connection to the Facebook's web server by specifying to TCP what the destination IP address is. Before we see how this DNS service is implemented, let's first understand what are the services provided by DNS. As mentioned already, this host name to IP address translation is one such service. This is not the only service. It also provides what is called host aliasing. Alias basically means other names. You may have heard of this term in the context of these criminals who do fraud. They have a lot of aliases. So they use one name to cheat one set of people and they use another name to cheat another set of people. Well, DNS does no such cheating. In fact, it provides a very useful service via host aliasing. Sometimes in a specific organization, you may use the same machine to run your web server or your email server. But to the outside world, you want to specify www. Let's say ABC is your company's name as your web servers, and let's say mx.abc.com as your mail server's name. But internally you are implementing this on this machine. Let us call it our.abc.com. So in this case, host aliasing is very useful. So what you do is you provide an alias to this which maps this particular host name to this our.abc.com, and similarly this also maps to our.abc.com. Another advantage here is later if you want to move this web service from this machine to some other machine, let's say ours.abc.com, you don't have to revoke this advertisement that you have already told others. Others can still access your web server by typing in this, except that within the DNS system you will change the mapping now to ours.abc.com. So here is an example with Facebook. So www.facebook.com internally maps to this particular host name. In other words, the web server of Facebook is hosted on this particular machine. The one you advertise to the outside world, this is called the alias host name. This maps to the star.c10r.facebook.com. This is called the canonical host name. Not only that, lot of these bigger organizations do something more. People can sometimes mistype the URL. So what they do is the spelling mistakes, like in this case Factbook and in this case Facebook, also map to this particular correct host name. So type this www.factbook.com and see what happens. You will notice that this indeed takes you to the correct website, even though you typed the URL wrong. There is another advantage of host aliasing. Suppose you are a small organization and this is your xyz.com, and there is another organization which is also small. Let me again call it abc.com. So these organizations are so small that they don't want to run their own web server. So what they do is they buy the service from some other server. Let's call it the server that is hosting these web servers. Let us call it service.com. So when you ask DNS what is the IP address corresponding to this, what you get in turn is the IP address corresponding to this particular host name. Similarly, if you ask what is the IP address corresponding to this particular host name, you also get the IP address corresponding to the same service.com host name. In other words, DNS maps both these entries to the same host name. Another useful service that DNS provides is mail server aliasing. Basically, it helps you identify the mail server for a given domain. For example, you compose a mail to me, which is chebrolu@csc.iit.v.ac.in. So the concerned program will notice that this is my domain and it is going to ask DNS what is the mail server corresponding to this domain, and the DNS will return this particular host name, which is jeeves.csc.iitb.ac.in, which hosts the mail server. As a consequence of this, I will resolve what the IP address of this particular host name is, again via DNS, and then I will send this email to that particular mail server. Similarly, this msgin.t.facebook.com is the mail server corresponding to the facebook.com domain. Yet another service provided by DNS is load balancing. I had mentioned this earlier. You normally don't run a single server, you run a server farm to handle the many clients. For example, when you type this www.google.com, which is the web server of Google, the incoming client connections could be directed to one of many servers. So the way this is handled by DNS is when you ask what is the IP address corresponding to this, it will give many IP addresses. And what DNS does, it is going to rotate this order of the IP addresses. So the clients normally act on the first IP address. In case they are not able to establish a connection to that particular IP address, then they take the second IP address, so on. So I will show this in action in an upcoming demo. So these are the services that DNS provides, but how are these services provided?